All right, got another interview today, and I'm really excited for this one because it's someone who most of his time is way before my time, and he also gives really wonderful amounts of detail on his answers. So really appreciate this interview. Thank you so much to CC Ace for doing this, and I hope you enjoy this interview. I would like to deem it the opposite of the Scythe interview, as it were. How would you describe your Triple Triad play slash style? Good question. With all of my accumulated knowledge, I would say my style is analytical and aggressive that attacks weaknesses in someone's play, and I do this in a paralyzing effect. It's like going through a checklist and observing if my opponent checks all the boxes. If I notice that my opponent doesn't know how to defend against a certain approach, or someone is obviously uncomfortable with how I am setting up the board, I don't let up and keep exploiting this until my opponent demonstrates that they can handle my approach. Then I move on to my next knowledge check and see if my opponent can handle that. Once my opponent shows some level of proficiency in everything I utilize against them, then the real games begin. Very interesting description to me. I did ask a follow up that didn't get a response yet on kind of what the checklist might look like. Is it like, responding to in a corner with an adjacent corner and making sure they understand the resulting structures? Or is it something more like complex positions with a lot of diagonals versus positions with a lot of captures to them, right? Because these have quite a different feel to them, and some players are certainly more comfortable in one than the other. Is it some of both? I don't know, and I would be interested to find out. But I think this is an interesting approach that is, at least at first, less about what is the optimal move and more about how well does my opponent deal with different types of positions, and can I figure out the one where they're exploitable? Who is your most interesting opponent? Probably Sujiro. Back in the days, Sujiro would always join my games and lose them each time, but he kept coming back for more, even if the losses kept racking up. I would say a third of his loss count came from me. It was very interesting, for sure. He talked very little, and at some point I expected him to start asking questions as to what he's doing wrong and maybe ask for advice. But he kept challenging and losing and challenging again. The most fascinating development is me observing his growth as a player, how he started to learn from his own mistakes even if it took a very long time. It would prove even more difficult for him because I started to adjust my play once he figured a few things out, and it would lead to even more losses for him. But he never gave up. He kept trucking along, and I would like to believe it battle hardened him. He had a competitive spirit that I haven't seen in a while, and I think eventually it molded him into a fearsome player. He won a big tournament, right? An SE tournament? I couldn't be more happy for him. Indeed, in 2006, he won SE Eris, which is in the conversation for the greatest tournament win of all time. It would not be my pick, but I think it is the best tournament win ever that was 7 rounds. I think there were 6 rounders that had tough enough fields that I would count them as more difficult, but you could certainly argue that Sujiro's win is the greatest tournament win ever, and that would be a reasonable case to make. Also, I think this is interesting. Like, for me personally, a big part of how I got good was losing over and over to players like Delhi and some games to Diacon Entite and some games to Karmazin when he wasn't playing trade, the weird off day where he wasn't, and Koner and players like that who were really good and playing a lot around, mid-late 2008 when I started. And that just losing to them, but seeing them do things was so good for my play. And it's nice to hear this was also a key development for Sujiro, too. Who is your toughest opponent? I have played several tough opponents, each with their own merits and strengths, so it would be too long to list them all. But just to give an interesting answer, I would say Kamikaze was one of the toughest opponents I've played. Why, you ask? It's because when I played him, it felt like I was playing a mirror image of myself. I was baffled with some of the choices he would make and the approaches he would take. It literally felt like I was playing my own clone, as he would make decisions I would normally make in a game. That's interesting. It sort of fits with the previous thing, but it's easy to think of like, if someone plays like you should be better at predicting their moves. But if your style is being exploitative and throwing things at people you think they will not be as good at handling, then it might be very hard to predict what you do in advance, right? This sort of reminds me of how I've had a lot of trouble with Belial recently. Obviously, I have trouble with Belial all the time, but specifically recently, where he has said he adjusts his play a little when playing against me, But one thing I've noted is I think Delial and I, there are lots of positions where we would just make the same move. Because it is like just clearly we both agree it is the correct move to make, we would make the same play. But because he understands in general, has a really good feel of what I would think is the normal good move in a position, he is very good at making moves that make it difficult for me to make the moves I want to make, right? And I think that's sort of the level Ace is on here, is he is making moves that are stopping the opponent from making the moves they like or are comfortable making. And that the kamikaze match feels sort of like a mirror match in the sense that the opponent is also throwing stuff at him that is where he's uncomfortable, and that's what he would be doing, when he has the initiative as well. What formation or move type do you like more than other players do? This can be for either open or closed, or answer for both. For open games, the T formation, in my opinion, is the strongest and one that has won me the most games, as long as the game actually has rules, same and plus minimum. I agree. I think I agree. I think the T is, on average, the best formation. For closed games, it really varies. I normally open with a corner card that is capturable on both sides. If it's an opponent, I have 0 intel on. From here, I start playing poker, mind games, and plant seeds of expectations on my opponent, even though I may not have the cards I'm trying to represent. Sometimes I may open in the middle and let chaos take over if it turns into an X formation. For closed games, you are really playing the player, and you can be a lot more flexible with formations, provided the story you are telling makes sense. So 2 comments. One is, I think the story you are telling is a good point, right? Like, when you start with a corner card, what you're telling your opponent is, I have cards that can recapture comfortably, ideally, but at least recapture from both sides, right? And when you make your next move, you're saying, maybe they go in the middle and you go in the far corner, you're saying, I have set up multiple captures and I probably have a good chance to have combos in these squares, right? And the moves you make are going to tell some kind of story, and the opponent is going to react to the story you're telling. And much like in poker, this might allow you to get away with stuff you don't actually have the cards for because you've told the story as if you do have the cards that manage that. The other thing I wanted to comment was, it's interesting he says you can be a lot more flexible with formations. I find personally, and I may just be wrong here, that because in closed, you are sort of playing for the highest average expectation, right? You're sort of saying, against this move, they could go sort of here, here, or here, and against that range, this move performs this well, and that move against the range of stuff they might do against it performs that well. I actually find, I think I end up on a much more limited range of moves, because I have to play the move that is kind of best against the range of what my opponent can do. However, perhaps with a more exploitative strategy rather than a more generalist strategy in closed, maybe it is the case that you can be more flexible. But I find this an interesting thought that this one doesn't accord with how I play closed, but I make no claims to be an elite closed player. What formation or move type do you like less than other players do? I don't know if I dislike any formation in particular. At this stage of the game, I believe the game is pretty much solved, and there are high success rates with certain formations if you go first. And likewise, there are defensive countermeasures you can utilize to deal with those formations if you go second, that at the very least your outcome would be a tie, unless you are simply outclassed in terms of cards, especially in a random rule set. Favorite way to meet a corner starter, a side starter, or a center starter? It really depends on what my opponent has in his hand and his knowledge base. As I mentioned, I like being aggressive and doing knowledge checks and see if my opponent knows how to respond accordingly. Sometimes I won't change my defensive approach at all, especially against corner starters, for a long time, but I will switch it up with a different approach eventually to throw people off balance, or if I noticed you changed a card or two in your hand. Do you have a preferred starter type? Does that change between random and hand games? Does it change between open and closed? No real preferences. I attack perceived weaknesses and approach accordingly, adjust accordingly. In closed games, it's about deception and building expectations. So you could be building up a story to tell them, then switch it up for an outcome your opponent doesn't expect. As Bruce Lee once wisely said, be like water. What is your proudest Triple Triad moment? This is a tough question to answer. This is like asking a parent what his or her favorite child is. Of course, forming Card Club was one of my proudest moments. I knew Ace was like a fundamental member of Card Club. I didn't know he formed it or was one of the founders. I have no idea. Obviously, Card Club is one of Triple Triad's legendary clans, and I knew he was an integral part, but not quite the extent of it. Being one of the first inductees in the Triple Triad Hall of Fame is another. Being a finalist in the first ever Triple Triad tournament, Card Clash, is another. The outcome of this tournament is another story to tell altogether. Yeah, I've seen the brackets because TTA saved a couple of things from TTX and TT.com. And so I went back and have seen some of the leaderboards and stuff and did see that Ace was a finalist in the first tournament. The Ace Invitational was very memorable for me, a very proud moment. Challengers from all over to defeat a hand that I created. It was a very lengthy win streak that eventually ended. The person who defeated it was CCGOC, CC God of Cards. I was proud of running a Bitebug Aviary with CC Yexa. We both had amassed 1,200 Bitebug cards in total. Even her slogan was catchy: Stab, save the aviary of Bitebugs. Love the slogan. And also, I didn't know where the origination of the Bitebug collecting stuff were. I know Kazik did it. Turds has collected Rebirth Bitebugs, but I didn't know where this all started. And again, Ace is very much the founder of lots of cultural pieces that have lasted now 2 decades or more. And it's nice to hear, for me, where they come from. Also, the name Stab is good. Aviary is a fun word. There was an incognito account I secretly played on that I was the most proud of. Some of you may be familiar with the name, SportyChick91. It was my incognito account in which I only played with a starter deck and nothing else. I amassed 1,600 wins and only double-digit losses with a 90% plus win percentage. That was actually pretty difficult to maintain, I believe it, all things considered, because of the limitations of what I can do with a starter deck. Equally fascinating was how different people interacted with this preteen soccer girl persona that I created. Yeah. Don't need to get into that, but all the kind of studies and versions of how people interact with what they perceive as different genders is fascinating and depressing stuff. I was definitely proud of running a Triple Triad related publication, Timber Maniacs, as its editor-in-chief. So I knew Timber Maniacs came at some point before Occult Fan, but again, know nothing about it. It would be great to find some publications of it. It was a monthly publication that covered a variety of topics, including strategies, player highlights, community events, creativity section, and even an Ask Me Advice column from Ulti/Rachel. Ooh, Ulti, another legend from the past. It would be wonderful to get an interview with. And, so much of what I know about the past is tournament-based rather than culture. And Ulti is someone who I think is incredibly important to both. But played like 4 tournaments and is still comfortably in my top 50 all-time tournament players. Somewhere around 30th, 35th, somewhere in that range. But it wouldn't have been a success without article contributions from other known players, such as Caus Debonair and Leviathan. The ego juice was real. I wanted to be good at everything I could lay my hands on. It was my approach to be invincible, to be immortal. I wanted to keep pushing the envelope. I wanted people to remember me in my many different facets, instead of just being good at Triple Triad. Fantastic answer. Love hearing all the little tidbits of different things. Really happy that he didn't just say one thing, but delved into a whole bunch of categories that really meant a lot to him and were a big part of the community. Should Delial be banned? Yes or absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't know the significance of this inside joke as I no longer am part of the cool kids. As long as he 1, doesn't like pineapple on pizza, 2, doesn't like his steak well done, 3, doesn't put milk in a bowl before the cereal, then he does not deserve the ban hammer. So I checked with Delial. I did, investigative reporting. I said, hey, Deli, got 3 random questions for you. Do you put your milk in the bowl before the cereal? He says cereal first. Good answer. Do you like your steak well done? Absolutely not. Good answer. Do you like pineapple on pizza? Ace wanted the answer no. He said sometimes. So I think we'll have to check in with Ace and see if this is an acceptable set of answers, or if Delial indeed should be banned. Notably, Turds agreed with Delial's terrible answer on pineapple pizza, So I am very suspicious of both of them. Why would you put pineapple on pizza? Weirdos. Okay. Should elemental be abolished? Yes, or immediately? Elemental is not that much more egregious than random, in my opinion. Both can cause chaos and unpredictability in their own way. I don't have strong feelings against elemental at all, as I will play any rule set as long as there's a shred of strategy involved. Sorry to disappoint. What clan or clans will always have a place in your heart? Card Club, easiest answer on this questionnaire. It's the clan I co-founded. The clan I've established myself as a player, and the clan where I've met some of the most awesome people in this game. Player you think is most underrated? I'm not sure if my answer is true anymore, but years ago I would have said Broccoli is the most underrated player in the game. Not many people know this, but I mentored and coached her in secret. Whenever we played, she would always pick my brain and ask questions about her play and how she can improve. I loved her natural curiosity, enthusiasm, and hunger to learn. Of course, I was happy to help and pass down knowledge. After all, a teacher is only as good as his or her student, a two-way street. Throughout our discussions and musings, I had discovered that she was a competitive Smash Brothers tournament player. This was another thing we had in common, as it was no secret I was into fighting game competitions. With that in mind, I decided to push her even harder. I decided to make a mental notes of her weaknesses as a player and made her play out of her comfort zone by making her play in various game types that she may not be familiar with. I advised her to aggressively challenge people better than she was in their own bread and butter games. I had told her that she is one woman in a game dominated by men, and she needs to be fearless in whatever situation she encounters. I would like to say that she turned out okay. A couple thoughts here. One is, this always reminds me every time Broccoli comes up that she worked on some Triple Triad tactics hacks to increase the difficulty. And I absolutely love Triple Triad tactics and really need to get around to trying those. Because, yeah, should be super interesting stuff. It's a fascinating and complex game. Secondly, I do remember Broccoli mentioning, I think more with Nimloth, but mentioning that she had done some kind of training around some other top players and really worked on her game. One of the, defining features of a lot of the great players is they worked really hard and lost a whole bunch learning. What else here? Yeah, I think she is the only woman to ever win a Triple Triad tournament. I'm not sure. Incredibly, she won the first tournament she played, the first site championship. She was the first site champion. And then after a few more tournaments, she took a break and came back and won the 9th site championship in her first tournament back after like 7 years of no tournament play, which is an absolutely insane achievement. She's one of, 7-ish, 8, 9? Somewhere single-digit number of players who have won 2 tournaments, I think. Probably shouldn't bog this down by trying to remember them, but let's try. Turds recently joined the group. Myself, Yojimbo, Delial, Seto, that's 5. Kamikaze, who's also mentioned here, is 6. Broccoli is, of course, one of them. 7. I think Nightwish, 8. Slash of Time, 9. Oh, it is over double digits. Who am I missing? Koner, 10. Alright, so it's probably like 11 or 12. But anyways, she certainly turned out an excellent player. And I also think one of the more, and maybe this is due to challenging people at the sets their best, I think one of the more versatilely excellent players. One of her skills and something that really helped her when she made really deep runs in both TTAC but also closed tournaments, all closed tournaments, was I think she's a fantastic closed hand maker, which is a very rare skill because not much rewards it, or the things that reward it are these occasional tournaments and playing lame rule sets. But in a tournament format, you're not just going to be able to run your level 5 hand of all 6/7 6/3s, right? You have to adjust to the rule set. And I think she did a really good job of finding cards with synergies that weren't obvious pairs that made it clear to the opponent what you must have. And I think she's probably the best ever, at least in tournament play, at threading that path of making unpredictable hands that had proper synergies together. And if you look at the articles she wrote later for Occult Fan, you can see the kinds of hands she was building had a lot of kind of secondary and not direct synergies. Piggyman's good at pointing these out too, though he tends to create a lot of the synergies through card pairs, and she managed to create them without card pairs, and I think it's a really cool skill she had. Who are your top 3 to 5 picks for GOAT? I will be biased with my picks because some of these players were the elite players in my prime, so please don't be offended if you are a current player and I don't name you. I love this, of course. It's great to hear people picked that aren't from the kind of current range, and I think by the fact that most of the people I'm interviewing are still around, and also because a lot of them are at least somewhat influenced by the opinions I regularly put out, it is easy to very regularly just get the same names. Now, I think the same 5 or 6 names would probably show up without my influence as well, but it's really nice to hear from someone earlier on who's going to identify a completely different list, and I'm excited to hear it. Lionheart / Shabrang, I didn't know his name was he also went by Shabrang, is probably my number 1 pick. Probably the most confident player I've ever had the pleasure of playing against, and for good reason. Extremely knowledgeable about the game, and there's very little that surprises him. He knew he was better than you, and had the killer instinct to take you out if you even showed one sliver of weakness. Not much rattles this guy, and to those who knew me best, I utilized mind games and psychological warfare in conjunction with my game skill and beat people mentally. Doesn't work on him at all. Solid and indestructible as a diamond. The greatest Triple Triad player, in my opinion. You hear, I've heard a bunch over the years about Lionheart and Black Bolt as kind of the AVL greats. Really nice to hear how tremendous a player he was. CC Shadow. I wonder if this is the same as Shadow 12. Probably not. Playing him seemed like he was always 2 or 3 steps ahead of you, a genius for a young kid his age at the time. A Triple Triad X.com special edition winner, he was nearly unmatched in TT ability, and a legendary fiery competitive spirit to go along with that natural talent. CC Nail. He was a pioneer, the player that had concepts to create the many different winning formations that you see today in modern TT, and many people followed suit and copied, emulated, and implemented his strategies. He invented them all. Fiona / Kados. Probably the most celebrated closed player of the early Triple Triad Advance era, and for good reason. Opened a lot of people's eyes and changed people's minds regarding closed games requiring a different type of discipline, a different set of skills to play closed games effectively. While closed games do involve some luck, Kados showed that there is skill to demonstrate regarding how well you can deceive opponents, how to lay traps, and how to eventually make people paranoid about traps that may not even exist. In my opinion, he empowered several others, ones whom you can argue that eventually became better than Kados himself, to fine-tune and perfect their closed-oriented games. A pioneer in his own right. Black Bolt, AVL. Arguably the best player ever that Avalanche had produced in its clan history, and most likely Finland's finest. Very similar in skill set and playstyle to Shabrang, that's not a surprise as both were very close friends. One of the most fearsome tournament players of early TT history, dating back to TTX.com. Definitely belongs in the upper echelon of TT greats. So I've thought a bunch about what's the best Triple Triad countries, and Finland's a really interesting country, and I think of the 2 greats as Tezuka and Jada. But you hear more and more, Asela speaks Finnish, not sure if originally from there, but I think so, and is a tournament winner. And now Black Bolt, another great Finnish player. Finland has a really good 4-player roster all time. That is very strong. And I'm sure I'm missing someone too. Or maybe multiple. I played Delial at some point, and while he wasn't established at the time, he was already demonstrating incredible skill at many different game types and rule sets. That kind of versatility and mastery of the game is what I wanted to achieve for myself in my prime, and I think Delial achieved that wonderfully. Doesn't surprise me that he's widely regarded as one of the best in the modern era of TT. When did you start playing, and what was your favorite era? I was around from the very beginning. Final Fantasy VIII was released on September 9th, 1999, 9999, and months later, TripleTriad.com was created by a man named Carl Crow. Krogh, I might be pronouncing that wrong. Croft, maybe? I received an invite to beta test this site when I was lurking in Final Fantasy AOL chat rooms. If my memory still serves me right, it debuted on January 10th, 2000. Quick aside, I really should have had a question in there. How did you find Triple Triad, and like what was your like story joining the game? And I think for some people like me, it's kind of boring, and I think a lot of people kind of have the same story. I was replaying FF8, and I was like, "Hey, I love Triple Triad. I wonder if there's a way to play more of this," and landed on TTA. But it is nice to hear origin stories that have a little more to them. It was a dream. Hundreds of players would play every day and stake a claim that they were pretty good with that one card game in FF8, even though we were all really bad at the start. But we had the heart, competitive spirit, moxie, and the creativity to elevate the level of play. It wasn't even a browser-based game back then. If I recall correctly, it was running on a software called Cold Fusion. It was very buggy, and lots of people exploited and cheated the game. But it was our heaven, our primitive home. My favorite and most memorable site for sure. Yeah, you hear lots of stories early on about attempting to cheat the browser or cheat the site. Heard a story much more recently about someone who got a lengthy ban from early TTA because they thought they could figure out a way to dupe cards in the card palace by like clicking maybe buy at the same time as someone else canceled the card being there and seeing if they could dupe cards. And they couldn't. But clearly early on there was I think there was poo-poo farming that might have been through Quest, but it might have been an exploit of another kind. I don't really remember, but it is goofy to hear about the early exploits. Favorite rule set. I don't think I have a particular favorite rule set. I played them all and wanted to be adept in every situation. I wanted to become the most well-rounded player. I would say that my favorite rule set is whichever one you hate the most. Have you met any other Triple Triad players in person? Only a few, but that's because a lot of my Triple Triad friends are foreigners and it would be difficult to coordinate to meet them. I've met CC Nail, the man I've co-founded Card Club with, but he was an online friend before we even joined TripleTriad.com. We had a really tight bond, even though he was even younger than I was when we first got to know each other. I've also met Red Mage Sarissa / Chocobo. I'm not sure any of you remember who she is, but she's another oldie from TripleTriad.com. I've also known her before joining TT, so it was natural to meet up at some point. I have met TE Soaps and TE Bloodhound before, but I feel like this doesn't count. They were my neighbors in an apartment complex, and we became friends. We were pretty much like brothers. Naturally, I introduced them to the game, and those brothers were instantly hooked. They were even fascinated with how I ran my own clan, so they formed their own, Triad Elite. Decades later into the future, TE Soaps would continue his dominance in card games. He won a huge Yu-Gi-Oh! National tournament. He's a high-stakes poker player these days. Cool, huh? Yeah, that is cool. Fun to hear more about Soaps. This is someone who is, again, like many of the names here, showed up as a very successful tournament competitor in a limited time early on, but I otherwise don't really have any knowledge or feel for. And again, really nice to hear details on it. I am now in my 40s and no longer the shy, awkward kid I used to be. I wouldn't mind meeting some of the familiar faces I used to know, even ones who live in another country, as I now do a little bit of traveling now and then. What's your biggest weakness as a player? You can evade the question if you think it's targetable. I personally feel I don't have weaknesses in my play per se. I am confident in my knowledge and experience of the game, but I do have weaknesses as a human being. I am a very emotional person, and when I'm feeling agitated, I will wear these emotions on my sleeves. I am a patient and even-keeled person in general, but if someone actually finds my red button, good luck finding out what it is. I lose control very quickly, and it may affect my play. It is interesting that more of Ace's discussion of play is psychological, both in his like checklist style of play, but also talking about how he messed with players, and Lionheart was someone you could not mess with successfully. The other thing I wanted to comment on here was Ace at no point mentions his comeback tournament. So he disappears, or stops playing actively, I shouldn't say disappears, fairly early on in TTA. Maybe by 2005-06, kind of like around when Sujiro wins his first tournament, which Ace had clearly kind of vaguely knew about. Ace had mostly stopped playing actively, maybe entirely. And then 2 years later, in 2008, maybe 3 years or 4 years after he actually stopped playing frequently, he comes back to play one tournament. And he plays like a few casual games while making the tournament run, but he goes under a different name. I should find what the name was. 1 second. He stealth plays a tournament. You may already know what I'm referring to, but if not, I will keep it private or secret for now as I try to tell the story. He comes back for a tournament and goes under the name Ein, which means one, I believe, in German, very similar to Ace. And in the first round, he is paired with Meta. And Meta is a German player who was one of the star players of 2007, has this huge breakout in 2007. And Meta beats him. He goes on to beat Kaori. Then he beats our sight runner Balls in the third round. Nice run for Balls, beat some good players. And then in the fourth round, he has this very tough opponent. There was this incredible bracket. A bracket section included Kamikaze, Nightwish, Yojimbo, and Grab. Incredibly strong section. This might have been Yojimbo's first tournament. He loses to Grat in round one. Then Nightwish, and this might be his first or second tournament, beats Grat and then beats Kamikaze. And Ein, our hero of this interview, Ace, beats Nightwish to make the quarterfinals. And in the quarterfinals, he has Felix, Feeling Lucky, who had a fantastic run to get here, beat Flasher, Scythe, Board Chart, and FF Player, who had knocked out Delhi. Beats Feeling Lucky to make the semifinals, and eventually loses to Turds, who goes on to win Vincent, the first tournament Turds won. So just even after not playing for maybe 3, maybe 4 years, comes back, plays one tournament, not really in practice. You know, he wasn't playing heavily around it as far as I know. Kept his name, kept who he was secret, and beat a real murderer's row. You know, this is before Nightwish hit top form. This is 2008, not kind of 2009-10. But Nightwish just beat Kamikaze, so he must have been great. And beat Grat, you know, 2 incredible achievements. Beats Meta at Meta's absolute prime, you know, or maybe ending Meta's prime. And eventually loses to Turd's best run ever. So even out of form, not having played a tournament or many games at all in years, Ace made a semifinals in SE Vincent. Note this was a 7-round tournament, so in a 6-rounder, and given the level of competition, this could very easily have been a finals run. You know, just a really fantastic run, and something that really impressed me. Wasn't even close to, I think, mentioned in his Proudest Moments, because he had a whole bunch of them, and this, you know, didn't come up. So it's not like, you know, this came to mind, but he decided, you know, I'm only going to say 1. You know, he said like 6, and they were all great. Could have easily said this too. But this is the one that has come across my radar, so I wanted to add it as one more, I think, really cool thing he did on the resume. So that's it for Ace. I hope you enjoyed the interview. I thought it was a really good one. You know, as Saif said, I had to pad out his to break 10 minutes. This one I did not have to pad out at all, and we've broken 30 minutes. So wonderful interview. Thank you very much to Ace for doing this, and I hope you enjoyed it.